Football season, especially college football season, is rapidly approaching, and it's time we talk a little bit of ball. And no better person that I'd rather have on than my dear friend Anthony Broome, covers Michigan football, Michigan sports, really, for the Wolverine. Happy to have him on. We will be talking a whole lot of Michigan football as they enter fall camp and a little bit of Michigan basketball talk sprinkled throughout. He's been on the show before. He's been a key asset and friend in my life for many years. He gave me an opportunity at maizenbrew.com right out of college when I was, I was 22 years old when he hired me. What an insane person that man is for doing that. So I much appreciate him and always will, both as a creator, a writer, and as a friend. So really looking forward to that. But before we get to the interview, let's get some show notes out of the way. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani 2014. You can find this show on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find this podcast in audio form on Apple Podcast. You can find it in audio form on Spotify, and Castellani content that's getting updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. And it really is every day, whether it's movie reviews, I'll Say This episodes, Chris and Company episodes, Tiger postgame videos. The grind never stops. That is one thing I'm incredibly proud of, is our consistency over the last year plus, and that isn't going anywhere for the time being. So we appreciate your continued support. Happy to have Anthony back on the program as we kind of get our appetite wet for what will surely be another exciting season of Michigan football. Let's jump right into it. Here's our interview with Anthony Broome. Anthony Broome joining the podcast today, episode 66, your second appearance. And as we continue, I say this like every episode, we're trying to figure out what the tier lists of guests. So I don't think we've had a 3-time guest yet. So you're on the expanded Mount Rushmore of multi-time guests. So much appreciated to you. Anthony, what's up, brother? It's been a minute.
I'm on the right track. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
If someone's a 3rd-time guest before me, I tip my cap to them. Hope to join that company someday. But no, it's good. Summer's been great. I don't wish, to quote Chris Ballas, who works at our site, I don't wish my summers away, but it feels like NFL training camp starts, college football training camp starts, and it's still a couple quality weeks of not being in the battle rhythm of game week, but we're back to it. And it's fun to, you start to stop talking hypotheticals and start talking about what's actually happening. Michigan's a little more buttoned up in that regard than maybe like an NFL team would be, but it's time to stop asking questions and start answering them. That's what I love about this time of year.
Yeah, and it's obviously more exciting, but it's kind of a little bit like when you're a kid and there's that, summers are long, but then there's that like 2-3 week period where the summer's still going on, but you're seeing the back to school ads and like you kind of have to shop for school supplies. It's like, I'm not back, but I'm starting to kind of get back. And obviously this was a good time to bring you on because fall camp just started. And obviously, look, I think that the last several years have started with a much different narrative just because I feel like the last several seasons there have been much more established faces in Schembechler Hall, whether it's with the coaches or the players. Now it feels like the big name on campus coming into the season in many ways is a guy who's yet to take a snap in the regular season for Michigan, Bryce Underwood. Is fall camp, from your perspective right now, simply all eyes on Bryce, or is there other things that you find yourself paying attention to and looking for as we get closer to the season?
I think and I don't mean this negatively, I think for the layperson, Bryce Underwood is probably 1A, 1B, 1C when it comes to storylines. For me, obviously that's a huge storyline, and Michigan's maintaining that it's going to wage a quarterback battle, but I think it's just more making sure that a guy like Bryce Underwood isn't given it, that he goes out and earns it. I think really all he can do in camp is lose it, in my opinion. I hone in on a few other things. To start with Bryce, a lot of people will compare him to Trevor Lawrence in terms of being a number 1 overall recruit, 5-star quarterback that gets dropped right in and plays pretty early. Now, Michigan doesn't really have a bridge quarterback to the level of, what a Kelly Bryant was that season. And also, Trevor Lawrence was dropped into a situation where they had playmakers. They had an offensive line. That team was kind of national championship ready around him already, and he was just there to elevate it. Michigan, it's a little different because you have a new offensive coordinator that comes in Chip Lindsey, and this is a ground up rebuild. And I won't even call it a rebuild. It's a build on that side of the ball because you didn't really have an offense last year. So for me, I look at not only Bryce Underwood, but the things I'm honing in on in this camp are that infrastructure, the pieces around him. They feel like they've fortified things in the portal at both running back and wide receiver. Offensive line is going to be huge for them. That was the engine of those teams, from 21 to 23. And it took a big step back last year. And I don't think that they would have had the passing game to do much more than they did. But the offensive line was a major, major disappointment. So for me, the excitement is all about Bryce Underwood and how he elevates you and what how much his baseline makes you better. But in this camp, I'm kind of keeping tabs on those other spots around him.
Yeah, and it's something we've seen in college and we've seen in the NFL too, which is like, a great quarterback elevates the ceiling for your football team immensely. And I'm sure that we'll see that with Bryce. But I think an issue that programs and organizations in the NFL have gotten into is this idea of like, all we need is the quarterback, or we're just a quarterback away. There's a lot of groups that need to be filled. There's a lot of guys that need to be successful. And I'm happy that you mentioned, the playmakers that Trevor Lawrence had around him, because, and obviously Lawrence generational, but like that Clemson team that he inherited, they were the 1 seed in the college football playoff the year before. Like, it wasn't like it was some, it was a disaster that where he came in and had to fill a role. One group, I think, that at Michigan has not been talked about enough in a negative fashion, I feel like, over the last decade or so, has been the wide receiver room. And I think it reached really rock bottom last year. We had Tony Garcia on, who he said that he thought it was about as weak a crop of wide receivers as there was in Power 5 a year ago. And, you made some moves. You get the transfer from Indiana. That's good. But at the same time, I think that there have been some pieces here in the last decade, like a Roman Wilson, who are really hard workers and filled their roles brilliantly, caught a ton of touchdowns. He was JJ's number 1 target. This is a program that has not had a 1,000-yard receiver since Jeremy Gallen. I mean, we're talking since the near the end of the Hoke era. Do you feel like the weapons are there for Bryce Underwood to be successful in year one, or do you still have concerns about what the wide receiver room may look like coming off of the really rough year last year?
I have concerns about their upside. I think when you bring in a guy like McCulley, who it's a shrewd addition, and it's kind of a, obviously you're a baseball guy. It's a bit of a Moneyball addition where you're betting on traits and what they add to your room and how their skill set can be applied to what you want to do. This is not a 1-to-1 comparison, but Michigan's made it just in terms of archetype and what they hope a guy like McCulley can bring for them. They're hoping he can add like that Nico Collins type of dynamic where you have a jump ball wide receiver down the field. They haven't had 1,000-yard receivers, but really in the last 4 or 5 years since Nico Collins was there, I know Cornelius Johnson was a taller guy, but he wasn't what I would describe as a jump ball or a red zone target type of receiver. That's what they're hoping McCulley can be. And we spoke to him yesterday. He wants to be a 1,000-yard receiver. He wants to have 10 touchdowns. He wants to be that alpha type of guy. And, I have questions on if he can do that. I think he's a really solid number 1 option. And I do think he will be the top option. From there, it becomes, and it's sort of tied into Underwood, I guess. I think what makes a good college football quarterback or a good quarterback at any level of sport is how you elevate the pieces around you. As a true freshman, I think we saw more we know that Samaj Morgan is a much better player than, hey, we're just going to run this bubble screen or a tunnel screen, and that's going to be what your role is. Like JJ McCarthy threw him a touchdown on a back shoulder throw. I think it was the game against Indiana that season. Samaj Morgan can do more with better quarterback play. Frederick Moore was a guy where, still needs to hone it in a little bit, but a couple of times when receivers were open down the field last year, and it didn't happen very often. This is the only passing game in the country, Service Academies included, that didn't have a passing play of 40 yards or more, which one or two times over the course of a season, sometimes you just even luck yourself.
Yeah, it's going to be there eventually. Yeah.
Fred Moore's got more to unlock as well. No pun intended. Anthony Simpson was a guy, a transfer from UMass, who 2 years ago, when he played for now tight ends coach at Michigan, Steve Kasula, who coordinated the offense at UMass, he had, I think, 55 catches and almost 800 yards. And then something happened. I don't know what happened last year. He got kicked off the team or left the team at UMass, and now he's at Michigan. So you have this weird little nucleus of guys who have had one good season somewhere. McCulley had a good season 2 years ago. Simpson had a good season 2 years ago. Samaj Morgan, we've seen what he can do. And I watched him play in high school. I think he has a lot more to give this team. In addition to a group of freshmen, I think has come in and acquitted themselves fairly well. There's not a Jeremiah Smith on there. No school in the country outside of Ohio State has a Jeremiah Smith. Alabama has a Ryan Williams. That's probably the closest thing you get to it. But I'm concerned, but I think they've taken steps to stabilize it and be the best version of it they can be for this year. And they've got some young pieces, like an Andrew Marsh, like a Jamar Browder, Jacob Washington, a speedy guy in that mix as well, that you probably see them more next year or the year after. So I have questions about it for sure. Some people criticize them for not going a little bigger in the transfer portal, but part of the thing too is that these guys that transfer want proof of concept. They want to go somewhere where they know that, hey, I'm going to catch 75 balls this year, and I'm going to make $2 million while I do it. I think Michigan, if they would have paid big for a guy, you would have had to probably overpay for someone who, you don't know how good it's going to be. So I think, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here. I think the engine of this year's offense is still the run game and those guys that they have and the steps forward the offensive line takes. But anything that they get that's even close to average or, God forbid, even above average from their wide receivers is going to be a huge step forward for them.
Yeah, and you talk about quarterback play elevating receivers. That's not to say, just to kind of go back to my last question, it's not to say that the talent hasn't necessarily been there. I mean, Nico Collins is a top 5-10 receiver in the NFL right now and played 3 years at Michigan. I mean, exceptional talent that was great when they got him the ball at Michigan. There were issues with that in the past. Talk about proof of concept and the offense as a whole and the game planning. Obviously, I think it was a combination of things, but the biggest reason for why this team sputtered the way they did for a large portion of last season was a combination of the quarterback play and the offensive play calling, just not really doing them a whole lot of favors. And limited offense for sure with the skill set that they had at quarterback, but gone is Kirk Campbell. You bring in Chip Lindsey, and it's an interesting thing because we've seen, and you've been around Michigan football even before you were covering them for the longest time. We've seen offensive coordinators come in here and promise this whole bag of goods. And what you kind of realize is, regardless of what the promises are or regardless of what you might want, Michigan is a program that still wants to abide by a certain identity, no matter who the OC is. And I think that what made Sharon successful during his time there was the fact that his was a real return to, as he brought it, smash football. It was the return to, we're going to wear you down. We're going to dominate you in the trenches. I think what Michigan fans are looking for with Chip Lindsey, and I am getting to a question here, what they're looking for is a more expanded offense. It's a more explosive offense. It's more of a 21st century offense. And I, just being skeptical, don't know if we necessarily get that. I think that we return to more competent play calling and more complementary football, which is what made them successful from the last several years of the Harbaugh era. So kind of a roundabout way of asking, what kind of offense can we expect from Chip Lindsey that's going to be different compared to the play calling that we saw from Kirk Campbell and Sharon Moore over the last several years?
The thing I'll say about Chip is that, and it fits in line with some of the roster acquisitions they made, with some of the moves that they made, but not the sexiest name. I don't think when people were putting their hot boards together last year that Chip Lindsey would have been in a lot of people's top 5, but this is a guy who has a really good track record of running balanced offense, creative offense, top 30 offenses. He's worked with Todd Monken. He's worked with Gus Malzahn. So he's got a wide menu of things. He has a wide sort of breadth of things that he can that he could put in or apply to each year. And I think the biggest example of what a guy like Chip Lindsey brings to the program is just look at North Carolina the last 2 years, which is where he was. And he didn't lose his job because he was bad. He lost his job because there's a coaching change. They Mac Brown parted, UNC and Mac Brown parted ways, and Bill Belichick came in. It was going to be new staff, all those sorts of things. So not a guy who was like when Josh Gaddis was hired. I think that was, I don't want to say Alabama sort of backdoor hoping he would leave, or same deal with Doug Nussmeier a few years before that. It's not gimmicky. He's got a long track record of balance and creativity. And I guess what I was going back to say is, 2 years ago, he has Drake May, who winds up being the number 3 pick of the New England Patriots. That's the engine of their offense. And, he was there the year before, non-NFL draft boards before it. So it's not to say that he came in and turned Drake May into who he was, but that offense fundamentally changes the year after when they played 3 quarterbacks last year, and North Carolina's starter got injured in the season opener. By the time the year was over, they had started 3 quarterbacks, but what they had was a running back in Amari Hampton who became the engine of that offense and, became a first-round pick, enough to where Jim Harbaugh and the Los Angeles Chargers liked what they saw in him. So I think what we're going to see with Chip over time is that they will, first of all, they're going to take more shots down the field. And that's not to say they become the air raid. I think that's always the implication when you hear, we're going to be more explosive through the air. No, they're just going to take some more chances. I think the screen game is going to be expanded and designed much better. Your running backs are going to be involved in the passing game a lot more than they have been at Michigan of late. And I think Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall are capable of that being thrust upon them. So when it comes to this year, though, we got to remember that it's a unique situation. It's almost like when a front office gets broomed out in the NFL and you've got a new coaching staff, rookie quarterback. You're working together to kind of build this thing up from the ground, and you peel back the layers as it goes on. And I think the path for Michigan this year is going to be being a little more meat and potatoes like they had been over the last few seasons with the running game. You hope your offensive line's up to the task and you're controlling the line of scrimmage and you can call what you want off that. And things click for Bryce Underwood down the stretch. And heck, who knows? Maybe you're a playoff team. I think as it expands and, you have a couple more, or at least another year, Bryce, you probably portal for a wide receiver, maybe a tight end next year. It's kind of going to be a build and a gradual peeling back over the next few years. But I think this year, I could have distilled all of this down to just saying, I think he's going to squeeze every single drop he can out of what they have. And if this team is as good as I think it can be, you're going to have maybe the best non-Penn State duo of running backs in the conference. You've got the blue chip quarterback. You've got a guy in Donovan McCulley who I think has a chance to be pretty darn good in this system. They're going to do a much better. I can't make promises that they're going to be a top 30 offense or anything like that. But when it comes to complementary football and making sure you stay on the field and sustain some drives so your defense isn't gassed, they're going to be much better equipped to do that this year.
Yeah, and in terms of complementary football, and it's a unit you've already mentioned a few times, but last year offensively, in so many ways, was a worst case scenario, and I think 80% of it falls on the quarterback player lack thereof. But I think where they ended up losing some games that they should have won in the middle of the season was that last year's offensive line was not the offensive line really that they had throughout a majority of the Harbaugh era. I mean, even I think a year that last season was comparable to in a lot of ways was 2017, where, you had the John O'Corn, Brandon Peters, Wilton Spate, trifecta that they were kind of spinning the wheel with at the quarterback position. But that team ran the ball really effectively, and you would get big games from Karan Higdon, you'd get big games from Chris Evans. Until the very end last season, there were a few instances like USC with Khalil Mullings. It felt like the running game at points a year ago had trouble getting going, which is very uncharacteristic for a Michigan offense. This was, obviously they lost a lot on the offensive line from the previous seasons. Does that remain a concern considering what they have coming back? Or do you feel like, given the fact that it is kind of Michigan, this is a problem that will ultimately fix itself?
I don't know if it's going to fix itself. Like there's a lot of work to put in there. And I think a lot of guys have put in that work this offseason. Terrell Moore, this is signing day last year was like 3 or 4 days after they beat Ohio State. And he was up at the podium saying, hey, like one of our emphasis for this next offseason is need to get more physical, need to get stronger at the point of attack. And I just think that when you look at what ailed them at all last year, forget offense, defense, just as a program, I think there was too much newness and not enough on-field continuity in terms of players, namely on the offensive line. I mean, they didn't just lose 2, 3, 4 starters. They lost their top 7 guys, all who were in NFL camps last year. And, they just kind of had to piece it together. And it was, I think physically, they weren't in shape. Giovanni El-Hadi, we spoke to him earlier this week, and he said that, he was playing much lighter last year and he was getting knocked back. And I just think there wasn't enough experience anywhere. Like if you lack experience on the field, you hope you have a position coach who's been through it and done it before. Grant Newsome, it was his first year coaching the offensive line. And I think that last year was kind of a wake-up call because I think a lot of guys thought, and I'm not, vilifying them or anything, but I think a lot of people in that building thought, hey, yeah, Jim Harbaugh left, but Throne is here. We played for him. We know what we are. Not a whole lot's going to change. And I think that, Texas comes in week 2, and that was an eye-opener. And I just felt like from there they were playing catch-up until, those last 3 games of the season. So I have questions about the offensive line. It's possible that you start talking about the true freshman starting at quarterback. You could start a true freshman at left tackle in Andrew Babalola, who is another 5-star and who does look the part. But El-Hadi wasn't very good last year. He's moving back over to the left side where he filled in a couple of years ago. Greg Crippen seems like he's had a good offseason. He's going to have to be much better than he was last year at center. There's a battle at the right guard spot, right tackle. It seems like they're going to roll with a guy named Andrew Sprague, who had a really good bowl game against Alabama and then had a really good offseason in the weight room. But until they sort of figure it out on the field, it's fair for that to be a question mark. Now, again, we talk about long-term and we talk about this window that they might have with Bryce Underwood. I think they've done a great job on the recruiting trail of getting some young guys to sort of build this thing around, with a Babalola. Ty Haywood's another guy who is a fringe 5-star that I think he has a chance to be in the 2 deep this year. I think the clock kind of starts on him next year, though, unless he has a big fall camp, which, there's still a couple weeks to go. But long-term, I think it will sort itself out because they just didn't have much talent there. They hadn't recruited well on the offensive line, and all those guys that were good left. It's going to take – I think they have enough this year to piece it together, though.
I would agree. I really like the running back room a lot, and that's kind of why I asked that question. Is I feel like last year you had a lot of potential in the running back room with Mullings and Edwards. I think that, we could do an entire show about the way Donovan Edwards' career kind of went, but I think that he very clearly got beat out. Mullings became the guy, and there were just a lot of instances in which, you had your Boulder, you had your Thunder in Mullings. I don't know if you necessarily had the Lightning. I think that you're going to have that combination this season with the 2 backs that you have right now. Want to transition to the other side of the ball because, of course, look, you lose Jesse Minter after last season, goes to the NFL, now the DC for the Chargers, doing a wonderful job there. Was a home run hire for Harbaugh. You go out and you make Wink Martindale the highest paid DC in the country, and for the better part of 9-10 games, this defense, well, not awful. I think we probably, well, not you, I probably overinflated their ineffectiveness throughout the season. They weren't living up to the potential and up to the talent that they had. Will Johnson's injury obviously had a lot to do with that. I will ask about that in a minute. But there was very clearly, definitely after the Northwestern game, but I would say even going into Ohio State especially, an adjustment, a change that led to them being more fundamentally sound, being more physical, getting to the quarterback more often, forcing throws. And when I asked Tony Garcia about it, he felt like the scheme was simplified quite a bit. Do you kind of mirror that sentiment and believe that that was the biggest change in Wink Martindale down the stretch? Do you think that it was more so the talent of this defense kind of coming together, or was there something schematically that just kind of clicked those last several weeks of the season?
I think it's a bit of column A and column B there, honestly. And I think that some of the simplifications that they made were by necessity. I mean, there was a point in the year where obviously Will Johnson was hurt, and I think Jair Hill, there was some sort of disciplinary thing going on. So you had Zeke Berry and Amir Hall starting games for you down the stretch. And I thought, I mean, that was Zeke Berry's best football of the year. He might be their number 2 cornerback again next year. That was, or this year, I should say, in terms of he was a bit of a revelation. So for me, I do think that, part of the problem with last year's team, and the defense was still very good, but they had no margin for error at all. You couldn't blow a coverage. You couldn't give up a long, a 3rd and 8 conversion. And then people would sort of MF the defense if that happened, as if it's their fault that you lost to a team like Washington or lost to Illinois or Indiana. 3 games that, were right there that they probably should have won. 2 of those. I don't think it's crazy to say that. They had to lead at Washington late.
Yeah.
Specifically, I look at some of the things like they had to simplify things on the back end because of Will Johnson's injury and some of the disciplinary stuff. I think at some point Makari Page may have missed a game, or Makari Page moved down to nickel as kind of like a place he's never played before, and then played the game of his life against Ohio State. But I also think that their defense stabilized as their linebackers did. Ernest Hausman and Jayshawn Barham, at least early last season, were prone to over pursuit or overrunning plays or not being out of position. And it feels like as things clicked for really both those guys, and you go on, you watch the film from last year, Barham in particular was a guy that stood out, especially, you look back to those games against Ohio State, Alabama to end the year. I think those were all stabilizing factors, but I think that they just kind of realized that, hey, if we pare this back just a little bit, these guys are going to know what they're supposed to do. They're going to know where they're supposed to be, and you play faster when you know where you're supposed to be. So I think it all plays into it. Especially they had that second bye week after the Indiana game where that was a completely different team. Maybe not offensively, but in terms of the physicality, the poise, was really impressed by that. So I'm buying that they can kind of pick up the baton and keep going from there. I think that I did a radio hit earlier this week where I believe it was on a Nebraska station. They asked about the defense, and I said, especially if Sharon Moore does deal with this suspension at some point early in the year, I still think you pack that defense and they're going to give you more than a puncher's chance in every one of these road games that they'll play early on. Because it is a bit of it's a more forgiving schedule, but when you've got at Oklahoma in week 2, at Nebraska week 4, at USC week 6, that's a tough slate, regardless of what you think about how those teams are moving forward. So I'm buying the defense. I think that they did sort of, the nice thing about being able to pare it back is that once they have the full understanding of that, they have the opportunity now to layer a few more things on it. And a couple of these transfer portal additions made them a little deeper. Now you get to rotate guys in. You get to switch up looks. I don't think the depth was there last year either. So kind of cracking the code on all of those things is going to set them up fairly well.
Yeah, I mean, we can't overlook not just how much talent, how much legacy, 4, 5, some instances 6-year NFL talent that was lost on that defense a year ago. And I think that you came into that season with several guys that you were really hoping to rely on. Obviously, the Will Johnson injury played a major factor. I would agree. I think that it's sad that it resulted in a loss. I remember thinking at the time, the second half of the Indiana game was their best defensive half of the entire season up to that point. And I think that's something, I don't know what was said in the locker room. I don't know if it was the culmination of several weeks of work, but it felt like something kind of clicked after that. And they really started rolling, played their best football of the year. And that obviously led to probably, this year, 1969, the biggest upset in the history of this rivalry, with Michigan going to Columbus and winning. And let's be real, completely salvaging the season. I would be asking I would be probably leading off asking how hot Sharon Moore's seat is if they lose that game the way that they were predicted to lose that game, which was as 20-point underdogs, quite frankly. Because then who knows? You probably don't even win the bowl game. You have a sub 500 season. It completely flipped the script for the year. You in our still alive Maze and Brew group chat with you, me and Luke, said coming into that week, not necessarily, pun completely intended here, planting the flag and saying that Michigan was going to win, but you had much more confidence than a lot of other people did. And for whatever reason, throughout, after the Northwestern game especially, while I didn't think they'd win, I felt a certain type of vibe coming into that game as well. I don't think any of us could have expected what we saw, which was this, I mean, I can't even call it a rock fight. It was a mud fight between these two teams that ultimately ended up in Michigan winning. Before we kind of get into what happened there, what gave you confidence going into that game?
Well, it's complicated because the week before the Ohio State game, I think most of the time you're just looking to be like, okay, they're as ready as they can be, or they might be in trouble. So granted, it was against Northwestern, but you come out of the bye week, you had just, and not that the commitment of Bryce Underwood has anything to do with it, but there was that week there, that couple day stretch where Bryce commits, you drop a 50 burger out of the clouds on Northwestern, and it was like a lightning bolt hit this program. They looked like a completely different team. Part of it too was on the Ohio State side of it though, because they played that big noon game that same day that Michigan beat Northwestern against Indiana. And they were, you saw Will Howard put out the cigarette, the Coach Sig thing. He put it out with his foot on the ground. And it's like, they are ripe for an emotional letdown because that's who they are. That's what they've been. And you just kind of got the sense that the things that Ohio State didn't do well, whether it was their offensive line had not played super well, especially their interior. You just got the sense that if Michigan could find a way to get them in a 4-quarter game, not that muscle memory would take over, but that the pressure was going to be completely on Ohio State. And first I'll give Michigan credit. I mean, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant completely dominated that game. Absolutely. Basically won that game on their own, along with some clutch plays from guys like Khalil Mullings and Peyton O'Leary out of nowhere, a big catch on third down.
And your kicker.
Dominic Zavada.
Yeah.
That's but you just got the sense that Ohio State, all the pressure was on them. And if you found a way to get yourself in a game like that, they were going to show the country once again who they had been. And make no mistake about it, I give them total credit. Like them winning the national championship and winning the first 12-team playoff, that was a bit of a catharsis for them because they were not in a good place. I was at the game. We listened to sports radio on the way home in Columbus. It was a complete and total meltdown. And they had psyched themselves out so much that and this has nothing to do with what we were talking about now with the text before the game. That's why I felt the way I did in terms of if you can just find a way to make it close, you're going to give yourself a shot.
Yeah.
But after the game, you're just like, it was typical them. And during the game, it was complete hubris. And walking into the game, their fans, I've been to a few of those down there now, especially that one a couple years ago. And there was a nervous energy then, but this game this past year, it was like a homecoming game atmosphere where the opponent that's in there today, you're going to beat the brakes off of them, and it's going to be a coronation, and you're going to be in Indy. They had all their plans to go to St. Elmo's Steakhouse and all that, and they just completely shat the bed. It was remarkable. But Michigan forced them into that. So that's, that to me was, in terms of, we talk about proof of concept, that was a sign that, the 50-6 over Northwestern, that is what it is. That was way overdue. They hadn't done that to anyone last year.
Correct.
But that game was a sign that, this year didn't go well, and they're making no bones about it. Like, they're not lying to themselves. They're not putting stuff out there that's not true. But Sharon Moore, I think, showed me through that game and that week that he can keep a team together, and he's going to have them ready to play. And even in some of those games they got blown out last year, those guys still played hard until the whistle was done. So obviously had to get better in some other areas, but that was, obviously 1969, much before my time, but that's the most out of left field upset in that rivalry. I don't think there's any question about it.
Yeah, no, I would agree. with the modern age of college football being what it is, and that team in Ohio State being what it was. And it is one of the strangest like championship runs I can remember, because I think what made Ohio State successful a year ago was their coaching staff, and what led to one of the most embarrassing losses in their program's history was also their coaching staff, which is that I get back to that game in Columbus and kind of dissect it here, and it was a bizarre experience for 4 quarters, whether you were watching it in Columbus like you were or watching it at home, wondering why the hell is Ohio State not utilizing their wide receivers more? Why are they not airing it out the way that we expected them to, with the secondary that's, one, been relatively ineffective, and two, missing their best defensive back? And there were kind of these whispers that schematically, they were baiting Ohio State into doing things. And I remember we had Tony Garcia on. He was like, look, Michigan played a great game, but you can't really bait anybody into doing anything.
You can't bait someone into running up the middle because they think their pecker is bigger than yours. Like, right, that's what that was.
And well, that's what it comes down to. Is my whole assessment of that was just, I think, and you've used the word hubris. I think that's what it was. Is just this belief of we can't just win this game. We have to be more physical in this game. And ultimately, who gives a shit? Oh, the ultimate result is what, how it's not style points. It's winning this game by any means necessary. I guess when you go back and look at what went down in that game, do you think that, and you already alluded to it to a certain extent, but by the time you realized that it was something of a dogfight, was it Ohio State collectively, how do I put this, falling apart to a certain extent? I mean, and tensing up the way that Michigan didn't in the last, in the finishing ending stages of that game?
I think something I've noticed, I've been in Columbus 3 times now.
Yeah.
I think the stadium energy factors into a lot of it, because you could feel the air come out of the place, and the longer the game went where it was competitive, you could feel the tension in the air. Like, and mind you, we're up in the press box way up there, but you could still feel the uneasiness, if they called a 3rd down run and got stuffed, the boos, mind you, booing a team that was going to go to the playoff no matter what.
Yeah.
I do think, everyone's going to say Ohio State blew it, and they did. I mean, they Ohio State's biggest issue in trying to crack this Michigan problem that they've had is that they're a Ferrari that fancies themselves a snowplow.
Yeah.
They just need need to be what they are. And that's what they did in the playoff. And they embraced who they were. They didn't make any statements about we're a tough team, we're a physical team. No, we're more talented than you, and we're going to put our boot on your throat. And I think if Michigan baited them into anything, it's that it's a style fight where that Michigan was playing, again, Zeke Berry and Amir Hall at cornerback against Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Ibuka, who's a 1st-round pick, Jeremiah Smith, who probably could have been a top 5 pick in this draft as a true freshman. I mean, just insane talent. So I think I don't know that they baited them into anything in game. I just think Michigan had been so in their heads that they're like, not only are we going to try and beat them, but we're going to try and be more physical than them. And, as if to puff their chest out. I don't give a shit. Win the game. Like, if Michigan had to beat Ohio State by abandoning the run and throwing 40 times, and that's what it took to win, I don't care you shouldn't care about what the style points are or how it looked or what it was. So I think if there's any baiting, it's the fact that they had won three in a row before then. And then I just think they were so in their heads about what the last 3 years had been. And, I talked about earlier, there was a bit of, they got so worked up about Indiana coming in the week before. It was all just kind of the perfect storm for, this bedwetting, which is the best way I could put it. And you saw in the temper tantrums on the field from a guy like Jack Sawyer. You saw it in Ryan Day standing on the field, like when you're playing a video game and you just drop the controller and your character's just standing there not doing anything. Like, that was a complete, just like it was a nightmare for them.
Yeah.
And like I said, I give them credit, but Michigan baited them into that by just being what they have been over the last few years. And that's, I think that's something that could extend into this year still.
And it's so interesting how the dynamic has flipped in this rivalry, because what you're describing, all the stuff you're saying, you could have said about Michigan 5-6 years ago in this rivalry, where there would be those plays. We looked at it as Ohio State was dominating this rivalry, and they were from a pure results standpoint, but there were so many of those games that were close deep into the second quarter or close deep into the second half, where Michigan would make a boneheaded play and couldn't get off the mat, or Ohio State would convert a big third down, or there'd be a dumb penalty. It was the penalty where a guy took off somebody's shoe and got 15 yards against J.K. Dobbins. I mean, just nonsensical stuff that you just can't do in a game like that. I remember thinking Michigan came into that game in Columbus very strong. And then Mullings got stuffed on, I think, a 4th and 1 at the goal line. And internally, I was saying to myself, like, okay, that might have been the run. You couldn't afford to make. That's the mistake you couldn't afford to make. 2 plays later, Michigan takes an interception, returns it down to the goal line. They scored 2 plays after that. I feel like that flipped everything in terms of not just momentum, but also, as you mentioned, energy in the stadium, where at that point it became a we're playing not to lose mentality, which against a team that has the kind of grinded out mindset that Michigan has, I think is a bad way to go. Yeah, I guess that'll probably do it for football necessarily. I guess one more football related question, which is you bring up the schedule a little bit ago, and last year, and I think this will continue to be the case as the Big Ten expands to however many teams it'll end up being at some point. But schedules have gotten tougher. I mean, last year's schedule, Indiana was better than we expected. Illinois better than we expected. Michigan obviously worse than we expected. This year, I think it's an easier overall schedule. But I also think that you have a game in the second week of the season that will decide how 2 different fan bases feel about their coaches going forward. I think that Venables, quite frankly, I think is, I'm not going to say on borrowed time, but he doesn't necessarily have a high approval rating, and Oklahoma has not been Oklahoma over the last, since Lincoln Riley left. And, Michigan, obviously, with things going the way they did with Sharon Moore a year ago, great. You end the year strong, have an awesome bowl game, you beat Ohio State. I know how quickly things can change in this fan base, and you can as well. They lose that game, and they're 1-1 to begin the season. I think a lot of those narratives that people had the first 10 games of last year come back through. I guess as somebody who hasn't watched a ton of Oklahoma outside of just the narratives and knowing kind of what's been going on with their program, and they did have a big win against Bama last year. How do you view Michigan as stacking up against them? And in the modern age, I think that this is such an overused term, but do you essentially view that as a must-win game if this is a team that views themselves as one that has championship aspiration?
Well, I think if you win this game, you certainly put yourself in the driver's seat where you at least control your own destiny to maybe be a college football playoff team. And I would say, though, I'll push back on the Sharon Moore versus Venables narrative just a little bit, because I do think Michigan's going to go in there as an underdog. You're going to start a true freshman quarterback. As of today, August 5th, we don't know, is Sharon Moore even going to coach in that game?
Yeah, good point.
But I think with the suspension, or with the the suspension's obviously baked into that. But the way that they ended last year, recruiting is going super well. Michigan's not going to go into that game expected to win. I think a lot of people might actually be pleasantly surprised if they do. So if they come out of those first couple weeks at 1-1. Then all of a sudden you're looking at the Nebraska and the USC games, and obviously they play Central. They no disrespect to either of our schools,
our alma maters. Yeah.
Central, they'll smack Central around.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, they get them at home. I'm not high on them at all.
They're trending downward fast.
It's not out of the question that could be like a 3-9, 4-8 type of football team this year. So, from there, it becomes, if you want to sell me that you're a playoff team, you have to win one of those next 2 road games at Nebraska, at USC, who, I think Nebraska is going to be much improved, but they're still Nebraska. They let victory slip through their fingers more often than not, especially in those close games. I'll extend it out a little bit more. I think if Michigan starts 3-3, then maybe some of the narratives from last year start to reemerge. But if you can, and obviously you want to win every game, but if you can get out of those first 6 weeks at 4-2, this is what you have coming up next. You've got a home game against Washington. You're going to go to Michigan State. You're going to host Purdue. You go play Northwestern at Wrigley. That's going to be a home game for you. essentially. You're going to go to Maryland. That's always pro Michigan. And then you have Ohio State at the end of the year. And, that 4-game stretch where you have Michigan State, Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland, I don't know where they finish when the year's all said and done, but those are 4 teams that will be in the bottom half of the Big Ten standings.
Right.
So and Washington could be a very good team. Everyone wants to find this year's Indiana, Washington, and Jed Fish.
I agree.
They have the ingredients to be, especially they get Ohio State, I think, in week 4 at home, at Washington. If you can find a way to get that one, because I think teams traveling coast to coast last year in the Big Ten were 6-22.
It's good.
Washington could be a team that finds itself in that playoff conversation. So that could be a very sneaky, tough game. Michigan State's always going to be up for the task because it's a rivalry game, but there's some runway in the back half of the schedule where if you can start 4-2, I think at worst you're probably looking at a 9-3 season. I really do feel that way. And you get the Ohio State game at home. And by the end of the year, this team should look much different, especially at quarterback, if Bryce is as good as we think he can be. That's the area of the schedule where you're looking for him to leapfrog into what next year is. So it's surviving that first half, though, is going to be key. Like if they can get one of those 3 road games, they're going to be in good shape. And you want to win the Oklahoma game, and you don't want to obviously, if you lose, you don't want to get blown out. But I'm not going to freak out if they go down there and lose. But I'll tell you what, Oklahoma fans will. And that's, I think that's a much bigger storyline from their perspective.
I would agree. It probably is more important for them than it is for Michigan in many ways. It will be it will be a homecoming for Sharon as he returns back to his, where he played. So obviously should be super interesting. Want to just ask real quick, talk a little bit of Michigan basketball, because I think that it's so, in the last 5-6 years, the roller coaster of not just variance in terms of success and or failure, but in terms of how the program is viewed internally by people who, are in control of a lot of things there, has changed quite a bit. Dusty May brought in after the 2024 season, right? You have a bottoming out with Juwan. He gets let go. You bring in Dusty, well-received hire. Now, look, last year, successful season, competitive all year, win the Big Ten tournament, make it to the second weekend, have a really awesome, really fun, incredible game against Texas A&M just to get you there. Lose to Auburn. That was a more talented Auburn team. But now we're seeing a Michigan program that is, one, not just bringing in top-tier talent, but 2, really flexing their muscles financially to do so. And one of the things that Dusty May has talked about, and one of the reasons why he chose Michigan, because I know Louisville and some other programs were courting him as well, was the promise of NIL funding and making sure that they were going to pump money into the programs. Do you think that this was a program that was always committed to NIL and spending in basketball, or do you think that this is something that maybe they changed their mind on once Dusty came in and they kind of started to see the kind of program that he was running here?
I don't think they were NIL adverse. I think that in this new age of college athletics, which is such a buzzword now, it reminds me of COVID. I hope these emails find you well in these unprecedented times. One of those types of phrases. But the way that college sports is now, I think that more now than ever, your head coach needs to be a fundraiser. Almost kind of needs to be a politician. You go out and you do these alumni events, and you get people fired up and kind of put faces to names and go out and be organized with it. And Dusty May, and I'm not even going to use this as a pot shot towards Juwan Howard, but Dusty May's performance in that area is not just, insanely improved from a Juwan Howard standpoint. He's one of the more organized and I guess just acts with conviction type of coaches in America. And it's easy to get fired up and donate to that if you're someone who has the money to do it. So I think that they've gotten their ducks in a row in that area, because the guy leading the program knows exactly what he wants. When they talk to guys, like they don't even talk to guys before, or they don't bring guys on campus until, they know that admissions is, and they're going to clear admissions and all that stuff. Yeah. So I just think from a process standpoint, Dusty May is just so far ahead of of what most coaches are right now. And the results speak for themselves. I mean, we're going to look back on that group last year that won a Big Ten tournament and, put together a roster the way they did, as it's going to be one of his more ragtag groups. It was kind of remarkable that they were able to cobble that together the way they were, and they made it fit, and they made weird pieces fit together. I mean, nobody thought that Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf would be able to play alongside each other, and it worked. And I just think that he's got a way about selling a vision, getting guys to buy into it. And, I think it's pretty remarkable that you bring in a guy like Yaxel Lindeborg, who's the number one player in the portal. Auburn was firing money at him. Kentucky was firing money at him. But he's going to come to a place like Michigan where he might have to sacrifice just a little bit more. And that's not even necessarily a money thing, but I think great teams and championship contending teams have a lot of good players that have to have some sort of shared sacrifice to get to where they want to be. And that you could go to the number one player in the portal who was at the NBA draft combine, probably could have been a first round pick, or at the very least an early second round pick, and to sell a vision and to sell what his fit might be. I don't think it's just as simple as, hey, is the money there now or isn't it? I think that the money is there because NIL efforts at Michigan have just gotten so much better over the last 12 months in general. But I think when you have a guy who is as organized as he is, it's pretty easy to put all those pieces in place.
Yeah, I would say, there's elements to Dusty. He's Harbaugh if his brain was like not as left of center in a lot of ways, just in the way that I think that like conviction, attacking each day, like, when he was at Florida Atlantic riding his bike to work and everything, like there's kind of these quirks to him, but he's very he's true to himself. And I think the energy that he's bringing to the program is undeniable right now. And I think the biggest thing, I've talked about it with many other people, but the biggest difference, and there's a lot, I would say, between where he's at currently and where Juwan was at, is that I think Dusty is a masterful constructor of a roster. I think that, and you mentioned it, the perfect example where there were those question marks coming in. You got 2 7-footers. You're going to start both of them. How's this going to work? And he knew exactly what he had. I think that year in and year out, regardless of what he might lose to the portal or lose to the NBA, I think that his ability to put together a roster that's going to fit and that's going to construct well together is a huge plus for him in the program. It really is an exciting time. Yeah, brother, look, I mean, this will not be the last conversation that we have. Obviously, we'll be texting all throughout football season, basketball season, and just about life. But it's been, honestly, there's been so much change, but it's probably been too long since we've done anything together and just kind of hung out. I feel like our longest conversations have been on Chris and Company, which thank you, obviously, for doing that. But we'll continue to be in touch, man. I love you to death, and respect and appreciate the job that you've done and continue to do.
Oh, it means a lot, and I don't have anything to add other than go Tigers.
Go Tigers. I appreciate it, man. Always good chatting it up with my guy. And, obviously a lot of things have changed in our lives. We've remained very close, but haven't really had an opportunity to kind of chill out. Like, I feel like the most conversation that we've had has been doing these shows. So I'm looking forward to catching up with him on a personal level, but it's always great to see the guy. He's as professional as they come, has about as high an approval rating as anybody in Michigan media. And that's not to necessarily play favorites. I know the guy is my friend, but there's not a whole lot of people that dislike the work of Anthony Broome. So happy to have him on the show and talk all Michigan ball. And yeah, look, like I've said, I've been in baseball mode for so long, but it's undeniable that like the boulder at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, football season is rambling right around the corner, and I am looking forward to it. It's just that, I don't know, that's just how I work. I can kind of only operate on one thing at once. But the second we get to August and late August, like, I'm going to be full steam ahead, and I think that this is a great way to kind of get started here as we rev our engines closer to football season. So that will do it for today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani 2014. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. We are on TikTok as well, getting ever so closer to 8,000. The goal is to get to 10,000 by the end of the year. We are on pace to do that, which is very exciting, but we can always use your support. This podcast is available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. It's available in audio form on Spotify. And CastellaniContent.com, being updated every single day with what Austin and I create. And of course, shout out to Austin Sisler, who continues to do a remarkable job as my producer. Keep sticking with us, guys. I really think that we're in a good groove for content right now. We're in a good place personally. I know how long of a process this has been. I feel like I'm speaking not just to my audience, but also to me and to Austin. But I wouldn't continue this if I didn't believe in the long-term goal. And, sometimes you got to go back to go forwards. I feel like we've kind of done that, but I'm also proud of what we've done. So appreciate all your continued support. Continue to follow Anthony Broome as well on all his socials, and make sure to support him and the entire crew over at the Wolverine. Thank you guys so much. I will talk to you again real soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.